Mrs. Comfort Okafor had run this family's money for 22 years. She approved every contribution, every family meeting decision, every kobo that moved in or out of the business her late husband built from one small shop in Onitsha main market. On the day she finally overplayed her hand, she was sitting at the head of her own dining table in Lagos, smiling, holding a file she believed would finish her daughter-in-law for good. She had no idea that file, and everything behind it, was about to be turned against her, in front of the whole family, by the same daughter-in-law she'd spent 2 decades calling the outsider. This is the story of how one quiet woman took apart the most powerful person in her husband's family, using nothing but documents, patience, and the truth. Stay to the end, because the moment Mrs. Okafor realizes what is actually inside that file is one of the most satisfying scenes in this whole story. Ngozi had been married to Chidi for 6 years. On paper, it looked like a good life, a duplex in Ikeja that Chidi's late father had helped set up, 2 solid careers, a husband who loved her. But there was a third presence in that marriage that never left the room. Mama, as everyone called her, Chidi's mother, Mrs. Comfort Okafor. Comfort had built the family's wealth with her husband's bare hands. One hardware shop in Onitsha main market that grew into 3, then into a small chain of building materials stores across the east before her husband passed. She was proud of that. She had suffered for it. She often reminded everyone. She believed that suffering had earned her the right to control it forever. The problem was, Comfort never stopped being the one in charge. She'd contributed toward the Ikeja duplex as a mother's blessing, and quietly ensured her name sat on the deed of assignment alongside Chidi's just in case. She reviewed Chidi and Ngozi's finances whenever she visited, to guide them. She had opinions about Ngozi's job at the bank, Ngozi's cooking, Ngozi's plans to start a family once things were more settled being a moving target that only Mama could declare. Chidi, for his part, was a peacemaker. He loved his wife. He also still flinched at his mother's disapproval like he was 15 years old again, sent to fetch her slippers. Whenever Ngozi raised something, Chidi would say the same thing. Please now, just manage the matter. If it don't pass. Let's not cause wahala. Ngozi had managed the matter for 6 years. She was good at her job. She worked in the fraud and risk department of one of the big commercial banks in Lagos, trained to catch what a loan application was hiding. But at home, she had learned to make herself smaller, quieter, easier to manage. What Ngozi didn't know yet was that the exact skill she used every day at the office, reading financial records for what people don't want you to see, was about to become the most important tool she had ever owned. Trouble started with the family business, technically now held under a private limited company, Okafor Building Merchants Limited, which Chidi's late father had set up, with Chidi named as a future director once his mother judged him ready. The company still held 2 commercial properties in Onitsha, and an investment portfolio. Comfort had grown quietly over the years. At a family meeting, the kind called with cola nut on the table and everyone summoned, no negotiation about attendance, Comfort announced, not asked, that she wanted to amend the company's shareholding structure and add a clause to the family will. If Chidi and Ngozi ever divorced, Ngozi would have no claim whatsoever to any company shares, property, or family asset, including the Ikeja duplex, retroactively. Ngozi said, calmly, that protecting family property from outsiders was something she understood, but she wanted to see the actual documents before anyone appended a signature to anything. Comfort's smile thinned. This one is not your business, my dear. This is family matter. I am family, Ngozi said. You married into this family, Comfort replied. There is a difference. Chidi said nothing. He looked at his plate of jollof rice like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. That was the moment, quiet, over rice and stew, no shouting at all, that something in Ngozi shifted. Not anger exactly. Attention. The same cold, clinical attention she gave a loan file that refused to add up. 2 weeks later, Ngozi asked to see the company's statutory records and the current will just so I understand what I'm agreeing to. Comfort refused, saying the family lawyer would handle everything properly, and there was no need for Ngozi to complicate a simple matter. That refusal told Ngozi everything she needed to know. In her experience at the bank, people who have nothing to hide don't mind letting you see the paperwork. Ngozi didn't confront anyone. She didn't argue at the next family meeting. Instead, she did what she did best. She asked for documents, calmly, one at a time, dressed up as harmless curiosity. "Can I get a copy of the CAC documents for the company, since Chidi is meant to be a director? Didn't you mention the Onitsha shop property was refinanced with the bank some years back? I'd love to understand how that worked, for my own learning. Do you still use Barrister Adisa? A colleague of mine is looking for a good property lawyer." None of it sounded like a threat. Comfort, flattered by the apparent interest, or simply careless, handed over more than she should have. What Ngozi found, piece by piece, over weeks of quiet digging through CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission, filings, bank statements, and property records, was this. The Onitsha commercial properties had been used as collateral for 2 separate loans in the last 8 years. Loans that never appeared in any family discussion of the business's finances. A chunk of that borrowed money had gone into a residential property in Enugu, registered under a company where Comfort was listed as the sole director, a property she had never once mentioned to Chidi or his sister. Company profit that should have been declared as dividends to all shareholders, including Chidi, who held shares in trust since his father's death, had instead been paid out almost entirely to Comfort as management allowance, at a rate several times higher than anything ever disclosed or agreed at a shareholders' meeting. In plain terms, for years, Comfort hadn't just been controlling the family money. She had been quietly draining a company that legally belonged partly to her own children, using her position as majority shareholder and de facto manager to pay herself first, and explaining the shrinking numbers away as market wala or tax people. And now she was preparing to permanently write Ngozi out of any future claim, while she herself had already quietly taken far more than her fair share of what should have gone to her own son. Ngozi didn't tell Chidi yet. Not because she wanted secrets, but because she knew exactly how this needed to be handled if it was going to work, and one careless move would let Comfort bury the whole thing, the way these matters are so often buried in families. Ngozi treated it the way she treated any suspicious file at the bank. Slow, quiet, thorough, no drama. She started with a property and corporate lawyer, not the family's longtime lawyer, but a new one, a senior advocate recommended by a colleague, with zero connection to the Okafor family. She brought copies of everything she had legitimate access to as Chidi's wife and as someone whose husband held shares in the company. The lawyer's read was blunt. If the numbers were what Ngozi described, this was not simply unfair family behavior. It looked like a clear breach of directors' and majority shareholders' duties, using company assets and loans for personal property acquisition, and paying yourself allowances the other shareholders never approved, could expose Comfort to both civil liability and, depending on how it was handled, scrutiny from regulators. Next, Ngozi engaged a forensic accountant to formally trace the money. It took weeks, CAC filings, bank loan records, the Enugu properties registration, all lawfully obtainable public and bank records, all devastating once laid side by side. By the end, there was a file. A real one. Dated transfers. A side-by-side comparison of what shareholders were told versus what had actually happened. A conservative estimate that Comfort owed the company, meaning owed Chidi and his sister, a sum running into tens of millions of naira.
Only then did Ngozi sit Chidi down. He didn't want to believe it at first. Nobody wants to learn that their mother has been quietly siphoning from the business their late father built. But Ngozi didn't ask him to take her word for it. She handed him the file and let the documents speak. Loan agreement. Property registration. Company allowance records. Shareholder statement. Side by side. In black and white. It took him one long night, reading in silence at the dining table, to move from denial to fury, not at Ngozi, but at 20 years of manage the matter that had made all of this possible. Comfort called the family together to finalize the new shareholding arrangement, the clause stripping Ngozi of any future claim. She expected a quiet signing, the way these meetings always went. She brought her lawyer. She brought printed documents. She brought her own file, the one from the hook, full of paperwork designed to make Ngozi's exclusion look clean and procedural. She did not expect Ngozi and Chidi to walk in with their own senior advocate. Comfort's smile faltered the moment Ngozi's lawyer introduced himself and calmly explained that before any new shareholding document could be signed, there were serious discrepancies in the company's financial history that needed to be addressed, discrepancies a forensic accountant had already documented in full. "I don't know what you people think you have found," Comfort said, still composed, "but I have managed this family's business since before this girl entered it." "That is exactly the problem," Ngozi said. She was not loud. She didn't need to be. "You have managed it as if it belongs only to you. It doesn't. Not the Onitsha properties you mortgaged twice without telling anyone. Not the house in Enugu you registered under a company nobody else knew existed. Not the dividends you rerouted to yourself as management allowance at several times a reasonable rate." She slid the file across the table, the real one, not Comfort's. Comfort opened it. Read one line. Then another. Her expression changed by the third page. Her own lawyer, glancing over her shoulder, quietly said the words that ended the meeting. "More, we need to speak privately." There was no shouting. No dramatic scene, no thrown plate of rice. Just the sound of a woman who had spent 22 years being unquestionable, realizing in real time that she was, in fact, very questionable, and that the daughter-in-law she had dismissed as the girl who married in had quietly built an airtight case against her. The new shareholding clause never got signed. Instead, over the following months, Comfort was formally removed as sole signatory and majority managing director of Okafor Building Merchants Ltd., a resolution she agreed to rather than risk a lawsuit that would have gone before a Lagos High Court and potentially drawn regulatory scrutiny, not just civil repayment. A settlement was reached. Comfort refunded a significant portion of what she had taken, and the Enugu property was sold, with proceeds properly split among the actual shareholders, Chidi and his sister, for the first time since their father's death. Chidi changed too. Not overnight, and not into a different man, but into someone who finally understood that manage the matter had a cost, and it had never actually kept the peace. It had only postponed the reckoning and made it heavier. As for Ngozi, she didn't gloat. She never wanted a war. She wanted the truth on paper, in front of the people who needed to see it, the same way she would want it for any suspicious file at the bank. Comfort still calls sometimes. The conversations are shorter now. Careful. She learned, at 68 years old, something Ngozi had known all along. Paper always tells the truth eventually. It only needs someone patient enough to read it. If you have ever had a family member who believed family meant they could control everything and answer to no one, you already know how satisfying this ending feels. Drop a comment. Would you have handled it the way Ngozi did, quiet, patient, and legal, or would you have confronted Mama head-on the moment she said, "You married into this family"? I read every comment, and I want to know where you stand. If this story touched something in you, hit subscribe. This channel drops a new story like this every week. And if you want to know what happens next between Ngozi, Chidi, and Mama Comfort, because yes, there is more, tell me in the comments and I will consider a part 2. Now, before you go, because I know some of you are already typing, "She should have done this years ago," in the comments, let's sit with what actually happened here for a second. See you in the next one. Ngozi didn't win because she was angry. She won because she was patient. 22 years of being underestimated gave her something Comfort never accounted for: time to watch, time to learn exactly how the business worked, and the professional skill to prove it on paper. Anger makes noise. Documentation makes cases. And that's really the lesson buried in this story. In most families, the person who controls the paperwork controls the narrative. Comfort understood that for 2 decades. She just never expected the one person she dismissed as just the wife to understand it better. So here's a question for you before we go any further. If you were in Ngozi's position, married into a family business you had no legal claim to, would you have moved as slowly and quietly as she did? Or would you have confronted Comfort the moment something felt off? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. Because honestly, Ngozi's story isn't rare. If you've ever been part of a family business, a shared property, or even just a marriage where one side handles everything, some of this is going to sound familiar. Here are 5 signs, straight out of what happened to Ngozi, that someone may be positioning you to be cut out. Sign 1, let me handle it, becomes a permanent policy, not a phase. In the beginning, Chidi telling Ngozi to let his mother manage the matter sounded like ordinary family harmony. But notice, it never had an end date. There was no point where the handling was supposed to stop and the transparency was supposed to start. If "I'll take care of it" has been the answer for years, not months, that's not humility. That's a system. Sign 2, you're related to the money, but never shown the money. Ngozi's name was quietly placed on paperwork nobody explained to her. That's the tell. Being included on paper while being excluded from the actual figures isn't protection, it's cover. If your name is attached to something you've never seen a full statement for, ask yourself why. Sign 3, requests for documents get met with guilt, not answers. You married into this family wasn't information. It was a redirect, designed to make Ngozi feel like asking the question was the offense, not whatever was in the file. Whenever a request for basic transparency gets answered with an emotional appeal instead of a document, that's usually the moment to pay closer attention, not back down. Sign 4, the numbers only get discussed in vague terms, out loud, never in writing. Management allowance. Family expenses. It's complicated. Comfort kept everything verbal and informal for a reason. Spoken numbers can be denied later, written ones can't. If financial conversations in your family or business only ever happen in conversation and never on paper, that's worth noticing. Sign 5, the one person asking questions is framed as the problem. By chapter 2, Ngozi wasn't the one hiding anything, but she was the one being told she was overstepping. That's a common reversal. The person protecting the truth often gets labeled difficult, while the person avoiding it gets to look reasonable. Don't let that framing decide who's actually in the wrong. If 2 or more of these sound familiar to you, that's not a coincidence, that's usually the shape of the same pattern playing out. And if you've lived through something like this yourself, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Tell me in the comments, you don't have to name names. Let's play this out a little further. I want to put you in 3 moments from this story and ask what you'd have actually done, not what sounds good to say, but what you'd really do. Scenario 1. You're at the family dinner. Your mother-in-law announces a new shareholding clause nobody discussed with you. Everyone at the table is nodding along because nobody wants the confrontation. Do you speak up in that room, in front of everyone, or do you stay quiet and deal with it privately afterward, the way Ngozi did? There's no wrong answer here, but there is a real trade-off. Speaking up in the room forces the issue into the open immediately, but it also gives the other side time to prepare a defense before you've gathered any proof. Staying quiet cost you nothing that day, but it cost you the element of surprise later. Scenario 2. You found the discrepancy. The loans nobody disclosed, the payments labeled as allowance. Your spouse still doesn't know. Do you tell them immediately, even though it might blow up the marriage before you have a full picture, or do you finish building the case first, the way Ngozi did, and risk your spouse feeling like you kept something from them? Scenario 3. The case is airtight. Everyone in the room knows it. Do you go for a full public reckoning, laying it all out in front of the whole family, the way this story did, or do you handle it quietly through lawyers, sparing everyone the humiliation but also the accountability? Comfort's punishment in this story wasn't prison or public shame, it was simply losing control. Is that enough justice for you, or would you have wanted more? Pick one of the 3, and tell me what you'd have done differently. I'll pin some of the best answers. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the outsider in a family that runs on unspoken rules, you're not alone, and you're not being dramatic for noticing. Quiet, patient documentation, like Ngozi's, is rarely the loud choice. But it's almost always the one that holds up. If you want more stories like this one, where the quiet person in the room turns out to be the one holding all the cards, hit subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is built on. And before you go, tell me in the comments which of the 5 signs hit closest to home for you. I read all of them, and I'll be back with another one soon.